It's always in each of those waves and pivotal moments, if you'd like to call them. It's really the market taking you. Your pivotal moments and your opportunities are at the intersection of your passion with what the market demands.
Welcome to TTalks, where we dive into the stories behind the leaders shaping our world. I'm your host, Walia. Today's conversation is with a renowned computer scientist and global technology executive, Gurvinder Ahluwalia. As the founder and CEO of Digital Twin Labs, Gurvinder has pioneered strategic digital platforms and led groundbreaking technological innovations. With a distinguished career, including roles as the CTO of IBM North America, where he co-founded the IBM blockchain business, Linux Foundation's open source Hyperledger program, and was nominated for the prestigious worldwide IBM Academy of Technology. Gurvinder's expertise spans AI, machine learning, IoT, and more. His impactful work addresses critical issues such as anti-money laundering, digital identity, food security, and carbon accounting. Gurvinder, welcome to TTalks.
Thank you for doing this, and thank you for inviting me to share, passions from my end.
It's a pleasure. It's something I've been super excited about. I just talked about a little bit about your journey in terms of what you've accomplished and things you've gone through. For our audience, can you share that pivotal moment that got you to where you are today? I find a lot of us have these moments where something changes. I've had guests that went from tourism to technology, others who went from healthcare into automotive. What does that journey look like for you, Gurvinder?
Well, there probably was just one pivotal moment and then a bunch of other smaller pivotal moments. And that one pivotal moment that put me into technology is when I chose my career, or actually, I would say serendipitously stumbled into it. As you can imagine, for many like you and me, the journey and the move from India to the United States, which is where I came from my advanced education into computer science. So in that sense, that was a pivotal moment. But prior to that also, in fact, growing up, I wanted to be a test pilot. My father was career Indian Air Force. So very, very different, very, very different careers. Longer story on, despite having been accepted into the Defense Academy, did not take that path and made my way into computer science grad school here into the country. So in that sense, that was really pivotal, right? And then there are smaller pivots we can, dive in and out as we go through the various technologies and its impact on really not so much a pivotal moment of choice, but a pivotal moment driven by the industry, by the market. You look at Adam Smith's notion of invisible hand or invisible foot that kicks you into wherever the market is going. So I've had the opportunity to steward the industry, open source movements, clients, and institutions through the formation of the internet. If you go that far back to where I started my career, deploying some of the largest networks of the world, and then into client server, then into web, then into mobile, then into cloud, then into blockchain Web3, and now, embarking onto the AI journey. But it's always in each of those waves and pivotal moments, if you'd like to call them. It's really the market taking you. So really what I would say to you and to those listening is your pivotal moments and your opportunities are at the intersection of your passion with what the market demands.
Love that. I love that. That's very powerful there, right? Because a lot of us don't adapt to what's the changes that happen around us. But before we get into that, I want to touch on the Air Force piece, right? Like that's the path that you wanted to go on. I know, given that we're from identical cultures, those decisions at home, especially against authority, and that too from a military background, sometimes can be challenging. And say, hey, you know what? This is what I want to do, or I want to be when I grow up. How was that conversation? Was it difficult? Was it easy? Was it very supportive? What did that look like?
Well, that's a conversation between parents and child, and in many cases between the father and the son. And it turns out you and I are both wearing blue, which is I might confess and show to you, to the audience, that it's a pure coincidence that they're almost the same colors, but they are the colors of the sky and the colors of Air Forces of the world. which is the larger family that my siblings and I grew up in the Indian Air Force in India. My father was career military, and when kids like me, particularly sons growing up in military camps around Air Force runways and airfields, it's quite simple. It's a natural choice to join the military. And that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to go into aviation, wanted to go into, being a pilot, and no less, a fighter pilot. And you got so many windows depending on your age on when you make an entry point into those academies. And the first entry point is around finishing high school, which I did, got selected. The next entry point is somewhere around the beginning of your undergrad or somewhere in the middle, which again I did. And again, I got selected. And then when you're finishing your undergrad, which in India in most cases is 3 years, and again I did, and again I got selected. So obviously you might ask, or people might be wondering what stopped. My father and I didn't have a very favorable discussion on this topic, even though he was very passionate about his career and about his flying in the Indian Air Force, and he was in combat missions in two major wars, and was instrumental to liberating two countries. Congo around 1961-62 as a United Nations force from India, and then in the war in 1971, which resulted in the liberation of Bangladesh. So he was very passionate about what he did and his love for flying. In fact, he's written a book on his memoirs. Rest in peace. We lost him about a little over a year ago. Airborne to Chairborne is a memoir that he's written, and he loved it as a passion, but it became very political as a career, and it was very noble around the time when he joined the military, which was shortly after India became independent. That independence, was in 1947, and he joined in the 1950s, and the military was regarded as royalty. I came of age around the 1980s, when it was a very different line of career, sometimes desirable, sometimes not, because of some of the politics that have kept him. So he advised me against it. Eventually, he did tell me, if you want to go, you can go. But I knew he advised me against it, and that's what pivoted my career to technology and computers, which is also something that he desired me to do, even though he wasn't from a technology or a science background himself.
Wow, very cool, very cool. And typically we don't see that, where it's hey, this is what we've done, this is what you're going to do, because this is the family is path or direction. So very, very wise of him to kind of look at it and say, hey, there's an opportunity here. Let's get you in the right path. So I guess it was a much easier discussion than one of my other guests who had more of a rebellious discussion at home than a more welcoming one. The other aspect, Gurvinder, I want to touch on is you talked about combining your passion with the market. The market swings in very, very different directions all the time. How do you identify what that direction is, especially now, you've been in blockchain, and we saw that wave, from the past couple of years ago, where it was just blew up, just almost similar to what the AI is right now. And a lot of the, one of the fears that a lot of people I talk to, or a lot of customers I talk to even have is, well, maybe AI is another fad like blockchain. And I try to tell them, no, this is not, none of them are fads for one, but the hype has, slowed down in terms of the general consumer market for blockchain, but that doesn't mean the technology has gone away. So there's some clarifications there. AI is more of a consumer product that they're actually getting accustomed to and used to, and there's more buzz around it now. What are your thoughts on that, and identifying the market, the right market for one, and then combining that passion on for some of our listeners, including myself?
That's a really good question, TJ, and also a tricky one, as I hazard to answer it. In some sense, I think there are probably three dimensions to it. In some sense, it's, sometimes it's just serendipitous, right? So I got into computer science, which back in the 80s was the most sought after program and degree And now the jury seems to be out on whether a computer science degree is worth it or not. And AI seems to be doing everything, though I don't think that's the end game here. So serendipity is one aspect of this, right? The other aspect is is being able to have a kind of a judgment call on where the market and which technologies are likely to stay, depending on the impact and its use case and its adoption. I'll come to the adoption point in just a moment as my third point in this. And I think that comes with a little bit of experience having dealt with different layers of technology. I happened to start my career in the semiconductor industry, even though I'm not a semiconductor engineer, but I was surrounded by semiconductors, and that was at Motorola, where after my graduate research at Berkeley, which was in networking protocols in late 80s, I started a job at Motorola Semiconductors in Austin, Texas, which later became Freescale, later became NXP, and deployed what ended up being the second largest network of the world back at that time. So my point being is, because I was surrounded by semiconductors, and then later on I did work at Texas Instruments, a little bit closer to hardware, admitting that my background is not hardware, it's in computer science. And understanding of where the hardware, particularly where semiconductors is going, really helps you make a judgment call on where the industry is. Let me give you an example. So the technology that you and I are using to communicate and record this and then distribute it, video conferencing is now very pervasive and pretty much commodity. I first actually worked on this in around 2003, 2004, when I was with Texas Instruments, which at that time was the major, or at least one of the two major providers to semiconductors into mobile phones. And if you keep that in perspective, and for the audience, that's when the cellular market was really picking up. And we were working at the chip level, at the systems engineering level, which includes hardware as well as software, and hence my role into it. We were working on having video conferencing capabilities in that systems level stack back in 2003, 2004, 2005.
Wow.
Now, when did video conferencing really become popular? It did not come out in the first iPhone, which was, again, to reuse the word, which was the pivotal moment in the industry for that particular sector. It did not come out with the initial iPhones. I don't know the dates very well, but let's say video conferencing on cellular phones started becoming popular, let's say about 10 years ago. Video clips were coming, just like a clip of CNN News or CNBC News, pre-recorded video clips. But to have video conferencing and multi-way, meaning multiple users conference, is something that has only in recent years, let's say the last 5 years, 7 years, become popular through WhatsApp, through FaceTime, so on and so forth. But my point over there being that the work that was done, that became possible only because about 10 years prior, the chip vendors and the chip designers were instrumenting it in. So you see the cycle, and in that kind of an industry, it takes about a generation of 7 years for something to pivot to a new set of functionality and something significant. The third dimension of my answer really is you begin to see, the third dimension of my answer at the intersection of passion and the market is you yourself. So the previous responses I mentioned, the previous points I mentioned, they kind of require some experience. But then there is also the other dimension, which is you begin to see where the investments are happening. Even for, new blood coming into the industry looking for jobs, you begin to spot where the hiring is happening. So it is not as complicated as my second point sounded it to be. You begin to see where recruitment, where IT, where technology, where HR, where staffing budgets are going. And you begin to see, and the market begins to pull you over there. And if that lines up with your passion, and you have the propensity and the appetite, I wouldn't say appetite, I would say the hunger to learn and be curious, then the market kind of guides you and gives you the indicators towards it.
That's great advice. And I mean, there's, again, a lot of components you touched on. The last piece there, go back to the hockey analogy, just being part from Canada, is, don't go where the puck is, go where the puck's going, right? Like that's kind of the analogy we look at. Start recognizing what's happening in the market, what the trends are. Those are key components there. But I do want to touch on your experience specifically, going or having a computer science background, working in the semiconductor space, right? Working with Motorola, then you're working in the hardware space as well. Those decisions are usually tough. People usually come back and say, hey, you know what? This is not my forte. I'm a software developer. I'm a software engineer. This is not my strength. This is not where I belong. What was your mindset through that and say, this is something different than what I typically do. Let me roll up my sleeves and get in? Or was there hesitation and concern? And is this the right path for me? Or was it curiosity? What did all of that look like, Gurvinder, for you?
The path for me has always been one of curiosity. And there is no paucity of curiosity in the technology industry. It changes, it innovates so fast. And if you are curious, you will find new stuff to happen, just like we are finding now. And I'm very, very curious and reskilling even myself, at this stage of my profession, on where AI is headed, right? So it really is a path of being kind of curious, as you go along the way. The other thing that I would say, TJ, is it's never really one technology or the other, and that is something that I've always reminded and cautioned myself. It's always a cumulative of technologies that bring the solution together. So what is more important to me than technology, what is more important to me than being a computer science or a technologist is being able to solution. I'm sure we'll touch a little bit more to elaborate on that notion of solution and solutioning. And my training, you mentioned, coming from Canada and hockey, go where the puck is. That actually was one of the mottos at a company by the CEO and founder of Sun Microsystems, where I spent, the turn of the century and stewarding the industry into the web era. And over there, we always used to say, go where the puck is. So being able to solution with multiple technologies, even though one technology is a new innovation and reaching a certain hype. So you cannot do cellular technology without, it would not have been possible. Of course, the network is what sparked it. Cellular networks is what sparked it. But it wouldn't be possible without embedded devices, cell phones. But then cellular technology is not just limited to cell phones. It is extended to the entire world of IoT devices, like home security alarms and so on and so forth, and now to autonomous driving. And then the third pillar of that technology is the cloud at the back end, and that is not even an exhaustive list of the pillars. But the point being, there's an IoT capability, there's the cellular network capability, there's the cloud capability, and then within each of those, there's more magic, which really brought it together. You move over to the cloud era, it's a set of technologies that makes it possible. You move over to the Web3 blockchain era, it is, at the native level, it became possible with three pieces that were not even new, but it was the combination of databases, it was the combination of peer-to-peer technology, it was the combination of cryptography, all of which existed for the previous, let's say, 40 years before 2008 happened and Bitcoin as a technology came out. But it was putting those pieces together. You move forward into AI, it's another set of technologies, old and new, that makes the solutioning possible. So it's a set of technologies that makes the solutioning possible, and that's kind of the emphasis. And the last point I'll make on this topic and to your question is not just a set of technologies, but when you look at it from a typical technology stack, so to say, you will find that if a technology is not mature, another layer will begin to compensate for it, right? So when codecs were not built in hardware, software codecs were compensating for the for that functionality. Eventually, what is pervasive and being compensated by the software, and if it is going to be highly adopted and pervasive, as we are now seeing with GPUs, they come down the stack and gets adopted. The lower it is in the stack, the better off it is in performances, including down at the silicon level. So all those 3 points, which you kind of invoke my thinking on, really are bringing and thinking through the solutioning together of different technologies and then across the entire stack. So sorry if that's a complicated, long-winded answer, but I just wanted to elaborate a little.
No, it's a great answer, actually, because I think a lot of people don't realize how AI functions, or, the people that are in the technology kind of have an idea. But when I'm talking to my customers, especially the non-technical individuals, I go in there and my conversation is, AI doesn't do everything. It does one thing, right? That's what you have to understand. You have to patch these components together. And the way you kind of summarized it, the simplest example I can give is a bicycle. There's so many different components that come together in order for it to be a solution to do something. Without the wheels, it doesn't do anything. Without the handlebars, it's difficult. Without the seat, all of these things come together for it to be a bicycle. And if you take that on an advanced scale, now you have an automotive or a self-driving vehicle that has a lot of these components that come together. So I love the example you gave in terms of solutioning, because it's not just one piece that comes in and solves all these problems. It's a mirroring of all of these components together to give you that solution. So I love the way you expressed and explained that one there. Within that component there, Gurvinder, you touched on where some of these technologies are headed. And I know you're actively dabbling with AI as well, and you're reskilling, and as we all are. I don't think there's anyone that I can come in and say that, they knew AI and this is how it's going to be to this extent, and this is the impact it was going to have. We're all reskilling as it is. From your perspective, where do you think AI is headed, though? Just based on what you've been exposed to, some of the fascinating things that you've seen with being done with AI versus some of the challenges that are happening or taking place with AI, because there's a lot of fear mongering happening as well. AI is going to take over the world. It's going to be like one of the movies, and and it's going to start turning on humans. Eliminating that and maybe debunking that aspect of it. What are your thoughts on the direction?
Not only have I had the honor of stewarding the industry and customers, institutions through different roles, through these waves of changes. I've had the privilege of seeing certain programs kind of end to end, and being not just a witness from the front row, but actually a practitioner of deploying these systems. I think what is really significant now, all right, let's put this into perspective, right? I think the way I think is, and particularly when engaging with an audience, the best descriptions, at least to my mind, is when you put it in a chronology. And that's not to necessarily say that this is a linear progression, because there's exponential stuff that happens, which is why it's called disruption. There was an age of just tabulation, which then moved into an era of computation. And each of these brought down a certain cost. Technology will never adapt unless there is an economic advantage, right? Everybody is in this for business. And in each of these phases, a certain economic trigger has happened. And that is the cost of just tabulation of numbers, like go back to Social Security systems, right? Came down significantly on how Social Security system census counting of populations of countries. So that's just tabulation, right? And then it came down to, calculation and computation, which is what calculators have done. And as I mentioned, I worked at TI, some lessons on how that technology also advanced. And then computation and the cost of computation came down. And the way the cost of computation then manifests itself to society, to business individuals, is the cost of the transaction comes down. And I'm going to I'm leading up in this chronology and in this thought pattern to where we are with AI in just a moment. And one of the books actually behind me is a book by Ronald Coase, a Nobel Prize winner in economics, called I believe it's called The Market, The Firm, the Market, and the Law, or The Firm, the Law, and the Market. And he is also the father of transaction cost theory, which explains why firms exist and why they exist in the form and the size and the shape that they exist. Why are some firms small and why are some large? Won't get into that explanation. But the point being that as you bring down transaction cost, it takes up the adoption of a particular function enabled by technology. Let me give you an example. Well, you come from an immigrant background, and I'm sure so many of our listeners do. When I moved to the country, it used to cost me around $3-4 per minute to call my parents in India, who eventually they moved to the US. What does it cost any one of us today to not just call, but have a video conference with our friends and relatives, overseas? Almost nothing. So you can see how the transaction cost of phone calling, video conferencing has come down drastically. Similarly, the cost of doing commerce on the internet came down with the advent of e-commerce and so on and so forth. But there are all these technologies that went into place which bring down the cost of, or which brought down the cost of computation and hence the cost of transactions. All right. So where does that lead us into from an economic standpoint on AI? What AI is doing for us is bringing down the cost of prediction. And the intelligence that we see, which is widely debated on artificial versus biological intelligence, even though you might see some of the numbers coming out recently that in so many years, only 1% of intelligence will be biological intelligence. And that's only because, and that really is not eclipsing biological intelligence, because that is a measure of corpus, of quantum, of content, right? Because there already is rapidly more synthetic data as opposed to human-generated data or human-generated intelligence that appears as human-generated data. So prediction is, the other way around, intelligence is being proxied as prediction. So AI is bringing down the cost of prediction. So think about, auto word completion, but just on steroids. And that's what the models, depending on how well they are trained, single mode or multimodal models, on text, images, video, are bringing down the cost of prediction on what is next. And that makes it look like it's intelligence. So hence I use the word that it's proxying intelligence. And it makes it almost so magical that it looks intelligent, to us. So let me just pause, give it back to you on, having kind of described what this chronology is, and then the underpinning, or I wouldn't say underpinning, but the overlying economics that are underpinned by the technology, the way I see it, TJ.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it and breaking it down as well, Gurvinder, because when we look at any of these technologies, the adoption, this is why we talk about, how OpenAI within, weeks not even within weeks, I think hours had the highest use rate. It's because it was essentially free. It was given away, the technology and the impact of it. And that's entirely what drove it. If that same, package of use case or usage was even priced at $5, I think we would have seen a very drastically different result. And so I love how you highlighted all of that as well, because I think people miss the importance of it. and they miss the value of it. And majority of the people today, even again, the people I talk to, I work with, are not using it to its potential, and they cannot justify, even in OpenAI's case, the $20 a month that they charge, because they're not using the technology to that extent. For me personally, I far exceed it. The value I get far exceeds that $20 I'm spending. If that price was even $200, I'd probably still sign up for it because of the value I get from it. And but it becomes a barrier to entry, to your point. So it's I love how you articulated that. From that perspective, your advice to some of the young graduates that are just starting into their career, there's a lot of confusion. What do we do? We talked about this in the beginning of our session, where computer science, some would argue, is irrelevant today. And it was something I started teaching my children on how to program, how to build websites manually from the age of 6 and 7. My daughter's 14, the eldest one, the other one's 10. And I've told them, I'm like, don't worry about coding. And my eldest daughter now, when she's building any Chrome extensions or anything, she's using ChatGPT to do it because it can spit out the code to generate and create this. What's your advice for these individuals who are going through they're going to start their careers, and there's anxiety of, what are we going to do? Did we make the wrong decisions? What can we do? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. First of all, I will confess that I'm not an expert on kind of the psychology of education and the impact of education to intelligence. But yeah, I can touch upon the impact of education to careers and vice versa. I think it is no surprise that the bodies of education, the way we know them formally, in the structure and the curriculum that they exist and are delivered to us, are not only atrophying, but they also have not reinvented. Yes, we've seen MOOCs, we've seen courses being available either for charge or otherwise. The importance of a mentor is really important, is I would say still of significance, even though you can have an AI assistant. I do feel that there is a fair debate that is required, and eventually it's going to be an individual or a family decision on the path of, well, let me rephrase. I was going to say the path of education, but rather where that education has come from. You're getting educated whether you go to an institution or not. And in some sense, there's another book behind me, which at one time was very, very famous, called, The World is Flat. And part of the world becoming flat was really enabled by the internet and knowledge and access becoming democratic. So I would argue, and this is also the topic of a talk that I gave at MIT at an AI conference 2 weeks ago. The event was called Imagination in Action, hosted by the MIT Media Lab, and I was the moderator and the panelist for a panel which talked about the trust aspect of AI, which actually I titled the panel as An Army of Intelligence Led by a Lion of Trust. And the reason I call it an army of intelligence is not only knowledge is commoditized, which it was over the internet, web, cellular progression, right? And the world became flat, even though the geopolitical situations have, other constraints. Now, you might argue, quote unquote, intelligence is getting commoditized. Right? So there's some level of intelligence at some level that is getting commoditized. I am from the camp where sentient machines is nowhere near where technology advancement is. And I think even the deep experts, much more sophisticated than I am, closer in the depth of AI research, have probably been saying that. But the appearance and the perception of of sentience is, I think, what gives us pause for concern and pause to think. And I think that's a fair thing. And I think now is, how do we distinguish where to train ourselves? And that comes a little bit to the decision making and the judgment. And I don't think we are ready, or even if machines will have complete agency, there will be certain aspects. It really is going to be on a use case by use case. I happen to drive an electric vehicle, which arguably by the manufacturer is autonomous. It's a Tesla. But I know, because of the false positives during autonomous driving I have received from the car, that I would not relinquish my agency over to the machine. And I come from a profession where I put a lot of trust in engineering and I put a lot of trust in machines myself. But I see that there is still a gap, and I wouldn't relinquish total control over to the car, because it has surprised me many times. Again, there's a whole different dimension to it, which I will only touch, and I have no expertise to speak to it. And that is the legal aspects of it. And if it is an insurance matters around law, or control and custody matters around law of what a particular machine, AI-based machine, does, who really is the owner, the custodian, the operator at any point of a catastrophe or a crisis or something that went wrong, right? Who do you pin that liability to? That's a question that is being discussed in law. And what I think, and this ties a little bit to the education path, is that you have to be able to draw some judgment. I'm not saying that the younger generation will be right or wrong every time. I'm not even saying that the parents would be right or wrong every time, or any of the mentors would be right or wrong every time. But that is the risk that we take. That is the curiosity that we seize, as opposed to being able to identify for ourselves a straight line, clear path. It's not going to be that. It's never has been that, even in my previous 20-something years of career. But to be able to see where is it that we want to maintain control of our own agency, as opposed to share certain agency and decisions that a machine is able to deliver for us.
I love the analogies you've given in there as well. And I mean, a lot of our listeners probably don't know as well that I also went to school for computer science. But after graduating, I haven't coded a day in my life, right? So you pivot, you invest in certain aspects of it. And I loved computer science, so I was self-taught to a great extent. But the role for me at that point ended there. And I said, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. I wanted to explore other things. So I got into sales, management, other leadership components, technical, a lot of different components to really continue learning, and in a different flavor, right? Not necessarily academically sitting down, getting a certificate. It's just learning. And that becomes essential. And that's what I do with my kids today is, listen, whatever you want to learn, you have access to. You don't need to register for a particular university and go to sit down in a classroom and do that. Whatever you want to learn, it's available. It's at our fingertips. Today, if we find that we want to challenge something, we can quickly do a Google search, or now I can use AI to say, find me contradictions against this. And you'll find polarizing opinions and perspectives on it. I do want to touch on the autonomous vehicle aspect of it, because that's something. I also have an electric vehicle as well, and I didn't go the Tesla route. I went the General Motors route. So I just picked up a Cadillac Lyric, very fascinating car with Super Cruise, and Super Cruise on the highway is fully autonomous. I've seen where I've had to take over and say, no, this is not the right thing, where it cannot detect certain aspects on the road, especially when there's construction and things that are not mapped out. So there's a lot of components that go there. And I posted a video on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago about a driverless Uber. And I was talking about, what that looks like. And, there's a mother and her child sitting in the back seat. They're getting in, putting their destination. I am not at the stage where I would trust that at this point, because my vehicle, again, fully autonomous. I believe with Tesla, you have to have one hand on the steering wheel. With Super Cruise, you don't have to have any hands on the wheel at all, and it will actually do lane changes. My vehicle was about to do a lane change into pylons because it couldn't detect them. They weren't metallic, they weren't heavy objects, they weren't dense. It couldn't detect them, and it was about to do a lane change, turn the turn signal on, and I had to intervene. If I was in the back seat or it was autonomous, that was a crash waiting to happen, right? So there's still a road ahead of us that we have to understand, and we have to teach this technology. But I'm personally not at the stage of fully trusting it. Not with my kids. I would never put my child in one of these vehicles and let them off on their own. So I completely agree and resonate with what you're feeling with this technology as well.
I don't want to do it now, but remind me in case I don't do it later, to share an example, from the field around autonomous. Right now, when we think of autonomous, we just think of cars, but more from the trade tech and global logistics, I might be an opportunity to talk on that.
Yeah, if you want to add, go for it. Yeah,
really two thoughts, right? Two kind of separate related thoughts. One is a little bit to the previous topic where we were talking about, where people should make choices in training, educating themselves into this future. So when I started my career, and both of us come from a computer science background, and I think this would apply to anybody who's a listener, whether from computer science or any other background, as I mentioned, one of my first major programs and accomplishments that I feel good about is I ended up deploying the second largest network of the world. And it was based on TCP IP routers. So a lot of design, architecture, configuration, some level of coding for managing the network and so on and so forth. But my point is, at that time, we never had to worry about like regulation, compliance. You mentioned my background in the impact of technology and the use of technology for anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing and those kind of activities. But today, the technologies that we are dealing with and that people have to learn are not just learning the technology, but learning this additional envelope around it. And that envelope has to do with policy, with regulation, with compliance, with law, with social sciences. So the message that I would want to leave, in addition to the path descriptions and agency control and judgments that I described previously, the message that I would want to leave people with is find ways to round in your personality, your skills, and really your mindset on not what I earlier called solutioning. And I mentioned that solutioning to be a convergence of multiple technologies. But it's going to be not just technologies. It's going to be the policy, the compliance, the social sciences, particularly aspect. I think what is going to govern the technology more from here on already is not just the technology itself, but the social sciences, the political sciences, the social sciences. So for those who might be of that background or have friends who are from that background, keep them very encouraged. Those are the people that we need into this gene pool, right, of the future, whether it's with the AI or it's with Web3 or it's whatever the next thing is going to be, and there will be a next thing. It's going to need more than just computer scientists and hardware and semiconductor engineers. The impact of this technology now is like so significant that earlier last year, a programmer was arrested for writing code which was arguably promoting money laundering. So you are now writing code, even if you're a deep computer scientist, which has far-reaching societal, financial, forensics impact, which starting my career, you would never think about it. You're working with access control lists and, writing information protocol and RIP and, pings and and stuff that happens in the underbelly of, networks. And you don't worry about, those kind of things. You increasingly have to worry about.
Great components that you talked about there, right? And I think those are Those are critical in terms of how we move forward as well. All these roles, and we talked about this even in the example of the bicycle or the car that we spoke about, they have to come together in order for these solutions to move forward. Without all these components, they're not going to be solutions. I had a call with a client, potential client this morning. They're building there's a startup, they're building a phenomenal solution. But my conversation was, what about the other components? What about the governance? What about the security, the privacy? There's a lot of components that you guys are not looking at. They don't even have someone hired for a role to even think about. It's an afterthought. It's not something you can do anymore. It's not the way we operate anymore, because without any of that, things are going to fall apart. Autonomous vehicles. I remember speaking to a friend of mine, and he was doing a keynote. He was the CTO of the Automotive Parts Association. And he talked about an example where you can have someone hijack an autonomous vehicle, and ransomware is a whole new wave of it, right? What happens if they take over that vehicle, take it up to a high speed and say, we're going to crash the vehicle unless you transfer X amount of funds into our accounts? What do you do at that point, right? How do you protect against all of that? So there's a lot of those components that are going to be required, and probably more than the actual application that we're building in itself to solve a certain problem, because there's going to be layers and layers and layers that we have to build for defense as well as scrutiny and governance.
Yeah, actually, I'll just build on what you just triggered, TJ. Before vehicles became autonomous, or are increasingly becoming autonomous, they've been smart for a while. They've been smart for I would argue for almost the last 20 years. Let me give you an example, and this is a real example. The moment you put in a air tire pressure, right, a tire air pressure sensor, right, it becomes smart. And for how many years have we already had air tire pressures in vehicles, right? It doesn't need to be autonomous. The reason I cite that that adoption is, once you put in smartness, you put in sensors and microcontrollers. In fact, it was very well written up and probably forgotten. I think it was easily about 20 years ago, where through a tire sensor instrument, a car got hacked and was taken control of. So wow. The exposure of IoTs is massive. In fact, for that reason, I've disabled my smart refrigerator and my smart cooktop and my smart washer dryer or whatever. I have a smart set of appliances and devices, but until I get around to finding ways to secure them properly, I'm not going to turn them back on. So you can hijack through any connected entry point and any connected device. The example on autonomous that I was leading up to is autonomous beyond just automotive, right? And autonomous is different from automation, right? Autonomous is where automation meets AI. And if you go back to one of my interpretations of AI, and that is being able to predict, right? If we bring down the cost of prediction, we basically commoditize it, and that's what AI is doing. And now you can begin to think. So a lot of my work is in trade tech, and that is the use of technology, modern technologies for global logistics, container shipment. I've deployed platforms put together. But the point over there is that everybody knows, you don't have to be an expert in what I just touched on, that you designate and you address a parcel or a container or a crate needs to go from A to B to C. But now think about the autonomous impact to that, right? Today, you have to tell that container or the parcel where to go. Tomorrow, that container will tell you where it's going to go. Okay. Now, if you, and technology is getting us there, are able to get it to a level of accuracy where right now it might be 80% accurate, that's not good enough. You'll try some experiments and carriers will make it 90% accurate, and then 95%, and then 98%, and be able to handle the residual risk of 2%. and we are off to the races. You now have a world where you aren't telling the container where to go. The container is telling you where it wants to go or where it should go. And now you have the residual agency or the kill switch on whether you agree with that, you want to approve that or not. So think about that totally changing the game on how global logistics happen. Amazon, incidentally, is already doing some work in predicting what you want to buy. They have the knowledge, right? And before you even, they invented single click shopping. And then they've gone after, next day and now same day. Where do you think we are headed next? You don't have to order and things will be at your door. And they'll get it down to a certain level of accuracy where, okay, maybe 5% of the order was wrong that they predicted, and they'll take the hit on that, and it's still worth it. So it's getting to be autonomous is not just a mobility notion. It's a much wider notion.
Absolutely. And those are great points that you've made there, Gurvinder, as well. It's like there's so much happening behind the scenes that we don't see. What we see on the surface and that's what's beautiful about technology. When technology just disappears and you get the end result, that's what I find the fascination with how technology works. And one of the best and beautiful examples of that I've come to use is the Nest thermostat by Google. Like, it's just one of those things that in the first little while you're tweaking it, after that, like I don't have to touch that thing. That's the beauty of it, is that it knows based on outside temperatures, my behavior, how I, react when things change, and it sets the temperature the way I need it to be. And that's where that autonomy starts coming in, and that decision making on our behalf. The example you give with Amazon, like, absolutely. There's a reason why they can do same day delivery, because they already know what you want, right? And they're already stocked up on it. So with that, Gurvinder, I want to thank you for this segment here. We're going to move into our amazing and fun rapid fire segment. So the rules are going to be very simple. I'm going to ask you a question, and you have to respond with the first thing that comes to mind. Ready to go?
Good. Yes. Without thinking.
All right. Without thinking. First one, tea or coffee?
Cappuccino. Coffee.
Favorite food?
Well, of course, Indian.
Okay. Anything specific?
North Indian.
Okay. Any specific dish? Let's start with that.
No bias here.
One gadget you can't live without?
My eyeglasses.
Okay. So that's a different one. Your wake-up time?
Pretty flexible, depending on when I went to sleep.
All right. And your activity to disconnect or recharge?
Chill at home. Movies with family. Yeah. With family, with friends, chill at home.
Just chill at home. That works. The strangest thing in your fridge?
It's a tough one. Sorry, I had to think about it.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
There's a USB drive.
A USB drive in your fridge. That is interesting.
I mentioned I've got a smart fridge with a screen, and I can play my pictures on the screen.
Love it. Love it. That's a very, very interesting one. Your favorite book? You got a lot of them back there, so I'd love to understand what your favorite book is.
One of my favorites is The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Nothing to do with technology, but everything to do with foreign affairs, intelligence, and geopolitics.
Favorite color turban?
It's a shade of blue, something like what I'm wearing, and so are you. So thank you.
Okay, excellent. And then my last question, if animals could talk, which would you want to have a conversation with, outside of any pets you might have?
I don't have a pet, but dog and horse.
Okay, dog and horse. Well, Gurvinder, thank you very much again. It was an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you for taking the time and joining us and sharing your insights with our audiences today.
Well, when you put together the puzzle from those answers, I'd love to get the psychology results.
We'll definitely get those over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, TJ. What a pleasure. And thanks for sharing this with the audience, and my best to them.
Thank you, Gurvinder, for sharing your valuable insights and experiences with us today. It's been a true pleasure. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to TTalks for more conversations with the leaders who are shaping our world. Until next time, keep on inspiring.